A friend of mine is Bosnian, and he married a Serbian, and together they had a child. They had to flee their country because their child, being of mixed race, was in danger by just being. They called their son Trím, which means courage. My friend said he called his son Courage because he felt as soon as his son was born that he'd lost all of his own courage, and now that he'd fight for nothing but the life of that child. I've thought about that a lot since I've had my son, about the things that I've lost. I thought that maybe I could have called him dress sense, or whole night's sleep, or the ability to watch a grown-up movie the whole way through. Then I settled for peace of mind. I was 37 when I first fell pregnant. I didn't fall pregnant. There wasn't like an incident with the sidewalk and a flip-flop or anything like that. Stuff happened, okay? Things happened. I got pregnant. I was 37. But the point is, I lived a bit. But suddenly, after 20 or so years of self-imposed hedonism, I found myself unable to smoke, unable to drink, and taking a little sabbatical from pâté, caffeine, and soft cheese. The discovery wasn't the kind of romantic one you see in black and white movies. I had been touring France on the back of a motorcycle with my husband, and towards the latter part of the vacation I'd started to feel a bit unwell. Now, here's a word of warning. If you're feeling sickly, best not do it 80 miles an hour, leather pants one end, crash helmet in the other, in a country where they eat snails because they can. So we arrive back home, and my husband, he decides he wants some carry-out food, and I decide I want to do a pregnancy test. My husband arrives back with his little brown paper bag to be greeted with the immortal phrase, "Put your curry down, sweetheart. I have something important to tell you." I've heard it said you feel most like a woman when you're pregnant. Not so. I felt most like a beached whale. And it's a bizarre thing because you suddenly find yourself like entirely responsible for this, other human being. And like this other human being has only got you. And even though like you're together 24 hours a day, it's not like you can just nip out to a bar and have a discussion about responsibilities or anything. Before I got pregnant, my greatest fear about getting run over by a car was that my underwear wasn't matching. After I got pregnant, the whole notion of being run over by a car took on a whole different meaning. Anyway, as I say, I was 37 when I fell pregnant. Now, I don't know if you know this, but medically speaking, that's quite old to be having a first child. In fact, medically they call it a geriatric pregnancy. I am not kidding. So if you're 36 and in here tonight and thinking that you would quite like to have a child, don't hang around after the show. Anyway, so pretty much as soon as I was in the family way, the medical profession decided that they needed, that there was problems and stuff. And they decided I should have this thing called an amniocentesis. Now, this is a test for Down syndrome, and it involves a big needle that they insert into the amniotic fluid, and it can tell you whether the baby has Down syndrome or not. But it also has a 1% risk of damaging the child or causing miscarriage. Now, I am not averse to risk, right? But it's all a matter of choice. And I am completely pro-choice. But it just seemed to me that they weren't going to do that. Do you know? I mean, it's not technically the baby's fault that I am old, So I'm not going to take a risk. Not unless there's a good reason. So the weeks would go on and they would say, you need to have the amniocentesis and everything. And I'd deal with it. do you know that way when you don't want to have a coffee with someone? Do you know what I mean? So they go, you need to have the amniocentesis, and I'd go, so I do, but I'm in a hurry. Could we like schedule this for like another time? Do you know? Because I figured that they would forget about it and we could all move forward. And then they would get more insistent, but as they got more insistent, well, so did I, right? I was like, look, can your test tell me that this kid will not be a jerk? Can your test reassure me that this baby is not going to be one of those horrible screamy ones that annoys the hell out of everybody in restaurants and aeroplanes? Can your test assure me that this tiny growing human being will not mature into a fully grown adult with some horrific affinity for Peruvian pan flute music? You see, because I am worried about Down syndrome, but I am pregnant and I'm worried about a whole load of things, and that is why I'm not taking any risks. So, thanks very much, but no. Then came the 20-week scan. The lovely lady doing the scan, she set me all up, and then she said to me that I was old. I knew that. Then scanning the baby, she said I was having a son. I was like, woohoo! Then she said that my son had a statistically large head. I looked across at my husband, for the first time noticing his statistically large head. I silently cursed love for being blind. Then scanning the baby's head, she said that one of the sides of the brain was dotted with chloroplexoid cysts. She told us that everything was fine, in that tone of voice that you know everything's not, and said we would have to wait for a specialist. The specialist arrived. She told me I was old. I know that. She said that it was a boy. I was like, yep, woohoo. She said my son had a statistically large head. I was like, you met my husband? She said that the cysts were a problem. I'd kind of guessed that. And then scanning the baby again, she said that there was a vessel missing in the umbilical cord. She said I had to have the test. But this time, because I'd waited so long and I hadn't had the amniocentesis, it was too late for that test. They wanted to do a cordial, which is kind of the same idea as an amnio, but they put the needle in, they insert it, and then take a bit of the cord. But this is like a cord that they had already told me was damaged, right? So my husband and I, we didn't even need to talk about it. I said, look, this is a bit of a drag, right? But, and we hadn't planned on a Down syndrome baby, but, there's worse things than being Down syndrome, right? I mean, being Down syndrome doesn't mean you're a bad person, it just means you're like a bit different. So, if he's Down syndrome, then so be it, no test. But then they told me that Down syndrome was off the table, and we were talking about Edward. This is a syndrome, a chronological disorder, that means that the baby will either die in the womb or within the first year of life. She told us we had to have the test. We had had so many scans. I had seen my son. I'd seen his heart. I'd seen the inside of his eyes. I'd seen his hands and his feet. And in fact, during one of the scans, he'd held his hand up to the front of my body as if to say, will ye go away? I'm busy. Leave me alone, I'm growing. I had felt my son move inside my body. What did it matter if he had a disorder or not? And you know what? If he was going to die, we are all going to die sometime, right? We should meet first. He was my son and he needed me. He depended on me to make the right decision. So I said, no. We had no choice but to change hospitals after they offered me a termination at 25 weeks. You see, it became obvious that they wanted a war, but I just wanted to see my baby. At precisely 35 weeks and 5 days, my son decided it was time to be born. My husband drove us to the hospital in our car, neither of us talking about what lay ahead. The conversation made up of the same 4 phrases. Are you okay? Yeah. You do know I love you? Yeah. The birth process was the true definition of laborious. My husband waited and gave me water and held my hand. And the midwives were patient and reassuring. It was early, they said, but it'd be okay. Everything's going to be okay. I've no idea how long labour lasted, but eventually, after one final push, my son appeared. Shot out, in fact, doing a kind of handbrake turn on the table as he did so. He was purple in colour, and my husband cut the cord. But whereas before there had been noise and bustle and shouting, suddenly there was silence. It was like the whole world had gone underwater. The door burst open and people in white coats jostled in. They bundled my son onto a metal table where they hurriedly tried to resuscitate him. I had failed my son. He was depending on me, and I had failed him. And the whole world was underwater. Then suddenly he gagged, choked, coughed up something and started to breathe. And the people in the white coats filtered off and people started to talk again. And with my husband standing next to me, they handed me my son. He was perfect. Fine, they said, he is absolutely fine. My son looked up at me. He was curious. He was amazing. I was so very tired. He looked up at me as if to say, "Whew, that was a bit of a trial." So very sleepy. I am so glad you're here, I said. My son is 11 years old now. And he is still perfect. Some of the time. And just like his father, he still has a statistically large head. I haven't seen my Bosnian friend for such a long time, and I still wonder how he gets on in his self-imposed exile. I called my son Fergus. In Irish, it means the right choice. But it has a different meaning in Scotland. It means courage, too. Thank you.